Hello, and welcome to my presentation for the Breaking the Mold Virtual Wellness Summit. I'm really glad you decided to click on this presentation. And today we're going to be talking about why your weight loss never lasts. It's a simple four-step system to rewire the thoughts that sabotage weight loss when it gets hard, because it inevitably always does. And so, really, what we're going to be talking about is the psychology of weight loss, the psychology of our thoughts, the psychology of self-sabotage, and how to reprogram those thoughts so that we can get out of our own way. Now, even though the context of today's presentation is going to be that of weight loss, I want you to keep in mind that all of the strategies, all of the concepts, all of the ideas that we talk about today can be applied to your life in other areas as well. Not just your health and your fitness, but your relationships, your career, your general what sense of well-being. It applies everywhere. So all of the tools you're going to get today are going to be multi-purpose, and I want you to keep that in mind. But before we dive in, who am I? Who am I to be sharing this information, and why should you even care? For those of you who might be unfamiliar with me, my name is Alex McBrarity. I'm a fitness coach, I'm a speaker, I'm a writer with over 12 years of experience coaching behavior change. Not only am I a professional in this space, but I've also personally lost almost 100 pounds, and probably more impressively, have kept off that weight loss for over 15 years. I also hold a degree in psychology from the University of Michigan, where I studied in depth many of the concepts that we're talking about today and how it's going to apply to you. So I have extensive experience in coaching behavior change on the psychological level, because I'm a firm believer that it's not having the perfect plan that allows you to see the changes you want, but it's becoming the person that can adopt those changes. And that is what I specialize in. Now, before we dive into things, I want to share a brief story with you. And it's about a belief that could have stopped the entire trajectory of my life. When I was 23 years old, I got my first personal training job at a commercial gym. And one of the other trainers there, her name is Mary, she coached many of the older population at that gym, and she had a busy schedule, a full roster of clients. And her and I had a great relationship. We would often talk to each other. She would share things with me, share wisdom about her career, and she was responsible for making me a better trainer during the year that I worked at that gym. But I'll never forget when I shared with her that I was getting ready to leave to start my own company. She said something that still sticks out to me. She said, "Alex, it's a good thing that you're young and single, because I could never imagine providing for a family on a trainer's salary." Now, even though Mary was successful as a trainer, she still relied on her husband's engineering salary to afford their quality of life. And so she didn't believe that you could make enough of an income in this space as a coach to support a family. Her and I didn't share that belief, and I'm thankful for that, because what resulted is two very different endings. This year, we're going to be celebrating 12 years of my company, A-Team Fitness, coaching men and women now all over the world in behavior change, in weight loss, and in developing themselves as individuals. 12 years. Mary stayed at that gym until she retired a few years later after the 2020 pandemic. And this is what I want to leave you with about this story: to be careful what beliefs you hold, because they will decide your future more than anything else. Mary held the belief that you couldn't afford raising a family on a personal trainer salary. And so she stayed at that commercial gym, an employee of someone else, until the day she retired. I didn't hold that belief. I believed that I could make something of myself, that I could build something meaningful in a space I was passionate about. And so I left to try. And that changed the course of the rest of my life and has led me to where I am here today. Really, the context that I want to talk about everything today is we're talking about mindset, we're talking about beliefs, we're talking about thoughts, and we're talking about rewiring those things. So I want us to think about this as an internal eye exam. When you are getting a new prescription for your eyeglasses to correct your vision, you go to an eye doctor and they measure the strength of your prescription. And then they give you changes and they give you corrective lenses to be able to see the world more clearly. And I wear contact lenses. And I'll never forget in high school when I walked out of my first eye doctor appointment to get my first pair of glasses. I'd been needing glasses for years, but I put it off because as a teenager who also had braces at the time, the last thing I wanted was to also have to wear glasses. And it wasn't until I went to go get my driver's license and I went to go take my driver's test and they gave me a vision test and I failed. And I wasn't able to get my license until I got corrective lenses that finally pushed me over the edge to go to the eye doctor. And when I walked out of the eye doctor in that first appointment with my new pair of glasses, I will never forget the clarity with which I could see the world around me. I could see every blade of grass, whereas before it was just a blurry patch of green. And so when you get corrective lenses for your eyes, the world becomes more clear. Similarly, when we go through the internal eye exam, what I'm going to share with you today, and we correct our mindset lens, everything in your life becomes more clear. The goals you're working towards, the effort that you're putting into these projects or to these areas of your life that you want to see improvement in, everything becomes more clear. You stay more motivated and it gets easier. But before we go any further, we really have to define what are we talking about when we're talking about beliefs and thoughts and predominantly negative thinking, because it's the negative thoughts and it's the negative beliefs that ultimately lead to the self-sabotage that holds us back from reaching our goals. I want you to think about this for a second. When we're going through the world, we are ultimately taking in massive amounts of raw data through our senses: sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. Everything that we experience perceptually in the world is from the data we get from those senses. And so that's just raw data. It's the raw stimulus. Our brains have to make sense of that data. Just like if we're looking at a spreadsheet of random numbers with no context about what that spreadsheet is about, we can't make sense of what the numbers mean. And the way that our brain interprets that data is by writing stories. Our brain writes stories from the stimulus we experience to make sense of the world around us. And this is a crucial point to understand because when we realize that much of our experience in the world is a result of these stories that we're writing, both good and bad, and we understand that we, as the author of these stories, have the power to change them, everything shifts. Because now what we often perceive as negative thoughts, we have the power to rewrite to become more positive, or at the very least to become neutral. And that gives us a much bigger advantage when we're trying to reach our goals. And so negative thinking is stories that we're writing about this data that causes us emotional discomfort. And we're going to be working to shift the narratives in our mind. I want you to think about what image you see on the screen. For some of us, we see a duck. We see the beak there pointing towards the left side of the screen. We see the eye, the back of the head. That's very clearly a duck. Others of us probably see a bunny. The beak now becomes the ears, and the back of the duck's head now becomes the nose and mouth of the bunny facing the right side of the screen. And this is where we have to realize something. This is objectively the same illustration. Nothing has changed. But we have two different stories: a duck and a rabbit. This is how our brain works to interpret data. We are writing stories. Now, the thing about these stories is that sometimes they're faulty. Sometimes they don't work in ways that we don't realize. And so I want to step back for a moment and I want to play a game. If you have pen and paper near you, I want you to consider following along. And so all you have to do is very simply is draw 9 dots on a piece of paper, just like you see on the screen in this square format. And this game is simple. Your task is to try to draw a line that connects all 9 dots with a couple of caveats. First, every line you draw has to be straight. There can't be any curved lines while we're playing this game. The second rule is that each of those straight lines have to be interconnected. What does that mean? That means when you begin drawing your 4 lines, don't pick your pen up off the paper. So 4 straight interconnected lines to connect all 9 dots. And what I'm going to do here now is I'm actually going to play along with you. So I encourage you, go ahead and give this a shot and see if you can connect all 9 dots. Now, if you're like me, I looked at this the first time and I thought, well, easy, no big deal. How hard can it be to draw 4 mostly straight interconnected lines? And my first attempt looked something like this. And I got the majority of the dots, but as you can clearly see, I'm missing the one in the center. Strong start, but I still failed. So let's try again. If your first attempt wasn't successful, I encourage you to give it another shot. The thing about this game is, while it is just a fun game to play that tests your mental abilities, it's also a metaphor. And these dots are not just dots. These dots represent all of the goals and aspirations that you have in your life, your health, your family, your career, your financial success, your creative projects and outlets, your hobbies. Each dot is something in your life that you want to accomplish. And so naturally, we want to be able to accomplish everything. So we give it another shot. I'm going to go ahead and give my second attempt, but I'm going to try a different strategy this time to see if I can connect all 9 dots. So my 4 straight interconnected lines, you can see I did worse the second time. Now I have 2 missing dots. So we try again. If you fail the second time, go ahead and redraw, and let's try a third time. Now in this metaphor, if those dots represent all of the goals and aspirations that we have, the lines represent the unbreakable rules that we must follow in order to achieve those goals. Now, what is an unbreakable rule? An unbreakable rule is something like the laws of physics. We can't, as long as we're on planet Earth, we can't get over the fact that gravity is a thing. Gravity exists. When it comes to something like weight loss, calorie balance matters. We have to eat less than we're burning if we want to lose weight. That is just a fact. We cannot change it. It's an unbreakable rule that we must follow. Laws are unbreakable rules. We don't want to break any laws in pursuit of our goals. This is the challenge. We clearly have many things we want to accomplish. And so we keep trying to follow our unbreakable rules, our 4 straight interconnected lines. And yet we seem to fall flat of achieving everything that we want. And this starts to wear on us. This starts to make us believe that we can't achieve everything that we want, that some things are just out of reach. But there's another interesting thing about this game, which is that we have our 9 dots that we want to accomplish, our goals. We have our unbreakable rules, our 4 straight interconnected lines to connect all of those 9 dots. But we're also operating from a different place. We're operating from imaginary rules that we've created for ourselves that don't actually exist. Let me show you what I mean. I'm curious, in any of our attempts, how many of us did what I did in the beginning and we kept all of our lines within the perimeter of this box? If that's you, then you're certainly not alone, because the first time I played this game, I did the very same thing. But that's what's interesting. If you think about the unbreakable rules that I shared with you about this game, it was to connect all 9 dots using 4 straight interconnected lines. Not once did I mention that those lines had to fall within the perimeter of this box. That was a rule that you created visually by seeing the dots in that square pattern. So now I want to try this again. And this time, I want you to understand that your lines do not have to stay within the confines of this box. And when we do that, we notice something different. When we can color outside the lines, we now are able to connect all 9 dots, still following the rules. And I share this game with you, and I share this metaphor with you to drive home this point. When we're talking about negative thoughts, when we're talking about beliefs, we are often operating from imaginary rules, imaginary boundaries that you've created for yourself because of past experience, because of misheld beliefs about the way things work, that is keeping you trapped from being able to accomplish all of the things that you want to accomplish in your life. And every tool that I share with you today is meant to help you begin identifying where these imaginary rules exist and where you can start coloring outside the lines and thinking outside the box to start achieving your goals. A limiting belief is a belief that we hold that keeps us trapped in those imaginary boundaries. And it's got two pieces. It's a simple formula. A limiting belief is a negative thought, a thought about yourself, plus a perceived barrier, something external to you, something in your environment. Could be a skill, it could be a lack of time, something external, plus something about you leads to the existence of these limiting beliefs. So we can apply that to these phrases here. Limiting beliefs can look like it's impossible for me to lose weight. The negative thought is that it's impossible, and the barrier is something about me. It could be poor metabolism. It could be a bad schedule. It could be a lack of self-esteem or lack of self-confidence. Those are the perceived barriers. And the negative thought is that it's impossible for you to lose weight. Another limiting belief, someone like me can't be healthy and fit. The negative thought is, again, something about us. It's impossible for me. What are the perceived barriers? A good plan, discipline, access to gym facilities, the time to dedicate to improving your health. These are all perceived barriers. This is how limiting beliefs work, and this is their structure. It's a negative thought plus some sort of perceived barrier. And so now what I want to encourage you to do is take a moment and write down one limiting belief that you have. It could be about weight loss or the challenges that you faced in meeting a weight loss goal, but it can also be about something else. Whatever limiting belief comes to your mind, I want you to write that down right now. And while you're thinking and writing down that limiting belief, I want to share with you the lens framework. This is the 4-step system that you can use to begin rewiring these limiting beliefs and these negative thoughts. And those 4 steps are to first look at your limiting beliefs. We have to know what imaginary boundaries we're operating from in order to know how to reprogram them. Second, once we know that they exist, we have to begin evaluating those beliefs. Are they true and valid, or are they wrong? The third step is to begin neutralizing the negative thoughts that we have. Remember, a negative thought is a story that creates emotional discomfort. And that emotional discomfort is important because when we're trapped in emotion, we can't think clearly. So we have to neutralize those negative thoughts. And there's an unintuitive way that we do that. Then we're in the prime position to begin shifting our perspective and changing our thought patterns so that we stop operating from imaginary rules. But like I said, step 1 is we have to look at our limiting beliefs. We have to know where those imaginary boundaries exist. These are the mindset archetypes. Now, as you notice, there's 2 numbers associated with each of these archetypes. And there's a reason for that. Just like our limiting belief formula had 2 parts, a negative thought, an internal component, and a perceived barrier, an external component, these numbers correlate, scored, to our internal mindset beliefs, that's the first number, and our external mindset beliefs, the second number. And so an individual that scores 100 or 100, they're labeled as a doubter. This is their category. They're blurry in both sets. So they don't have a lot of self-confidence or self-esteem or self-trust, but they also see so many barriers in their life that are preventing them from success. A striver has a clear sense of who they are. They have a clear internal mindset lens, but their external lens is blurry. So a striver is someone who's inherently driven and motivated, and they keep trying and trying and trying. But for some reason, they keep falling short. And it's because of those external perceived barriers. A reflector is the opposite of a striver. They are clear on what resources they have available to them. They understand how to overcome those external barriers. If they're lacking skill, they go and seek knowledge. They look to others for help when they need it. But they don't have a lot of self-trust or self-confidence. So their internal mindset lens is blurry. Now, ultimately, through the work that we do going through this process, we begin to clear our mindset lens, both internally and externally, because ultimately we want to land in the achiever category, which is perfect clarity, 20/20 mindset vision, where we both have the self-trust and self-confidence and the understanding of how to overcome external barriers. When both of those are aligned, we stand the best chance of reaching our goals and eliminating those imaginary boundaries that exist. Now, you may see this and you might be wondering which category you might fall into. And the importance of this is it gives us a starting point with which to begin figuring out where the current limiting beliefs are. Are they something internal about us or is it something external? And the best way to figure out which category you fall into is to take my mindset quiz. Now, you can scan this QR code. It will take you to the free quiz that's actually going to measure which archetype you currently fall into based on your mindset lens score. Once we know our mindset archetype, once we know where we need to start looking for limiting beliefs, internally or externally, now we have to evaluate those beliefs. Are they real? Are they true? And the way that we can do that is something called Socratic questioning. Now, this is a strategy taken from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And even though this isn't therapy, it can feel therapeutic. And it's a very simple process. When you're having a negative thought, when you recognize the story that you're writing that's causing emotional discomfort, you can filter that story through 5 simple questions. The first, what is the evidence that that thought is true? Now, what you're doing with this question is you're starting to question the reality of that statement. Do I have evidence? Do I have data objectively that tells me what I'm believing is true? Let's apply this to weight loss. Let's say that your negative limiting belief is that it's impossible for you to lose weight. Okay, what is the evidence that that thought is true? Have you ever lost weight in the past, even a couple of pounds? If the answer is yes, then physiologically you can lose weight. There's just something else at play that's keeping you trapped. The second question, if you're wrong, what is a different way to look at the situation? The importance of this question is now you're calling into question the subjectivity of the story that you're writing. Because remember, every story that we write about our world is subjective. It's impossible for me to lose weight. Okay, if you're wrong, what's another way to look at that? Is it that you don't follow a clear plan? Is it that the plan that you adopt doesn't match the lifestyle restrictions that you currently experience? Is it because you fill your house with junk food and the temptation is too strong that it pulls you off track? These were all alternative stories that could be written about the belief that you're unable to lose weight. The third question, if you're right, what can you do about the situation? If it's extremely difficult for you to lose weight, what can you do about it? Can you recruit the help of a coach to guide you through the process? Can you take courses and learn more about how nutrition works or about how exercise works to make your plan more effective? The importance about this question, if you're right, what can you do about it, is that it shifts us from a problem-focused mindset to a solution-oriented one. Now, instead of just harping on the problem, we're actively seeking solutions to solve those problems. And that is a crucial step in this process. By the way, if you haven't already done so, I recommend answering each of these questions for the limiting belief that you listed earlier as we go through them. The fourth question, and my personal favorite, what advice would you give to a friend in the exact same situation? So a friend comes to you and they say, so-and-so, it feels impossible for me to lose weight. What advice would you give that person? Would you encourage them to seek support? Would you encourage them to try a better plan? Would you point out the myths that they might be following with regard to nutrition and weight loss? And the importance of this question is it helps us create emotional distance. Our brains have 2 sides, emotional and rational. Our rational side thinks clearly, logically. Our emotional side doesn't. And so when we're operating from emotion, we don't think clearly. This is why most people find they give great advice to their friends, and I'm sure this is true for you, but find it so much more difficult to take that advice ourselves. Because when we are actively experiencing the situation, our emotional brain is turned on. We are feeling those emotions, and it's clouding our judgment. But when a friend asks us about their situation, we're removed from the emotion, and we can think more logically. And finally, once you go through those first 4 questions, the 5th and final question is, what should you do right now? And naturally, this is going to push us into an action state of mind. We've come up with alternative stories. We've come up with some solutions. We've been able to think more clearly and remove ourselves from the emotion. And now we need to do something different. We can leverage these 5 questions for every negative thought and limiting belief that you experience. This is a great journaling activity. And the benefit is over time, you're actually reprogramming how you interpret the events in your life. This process is the act of taking off the negative mindset frames and trying on a different pair, one that's more positive. Once we're able to look at our limiting beliefs and we're able to evaluate them using those set of questions from the last slide, now we have to neutralize our negative thoughts. But the way that we do this is unintuitive. It's not what you would immediately expect. And to highlight this, I want to share a story with you. When I was 7 years old, I snuck a viewing of the movie Psycho, the old 1960s Hitchcock movie. And that is still to date the only scary movie that ruined me as a child. I couldn't sleep for months afterwards because I would lay in my bed at night in my dark room and I would try to stop myself from having negative thoughts, from having scary thoughts that something or someone was going to get me. But something interesting happened. The more I told myself not to be scared, the more scared I became. Suddenly, the crack in my closet door became a portal to a different dimension or a monster staring back at me. The pile of clothes in the corner of my room became a figure watching me sleep. The wind and branches rustling against the outside of my window became creatures trying to get into my room. The more I told myself not to be scared, the more scared I became. And this is an interesting way about how our brains work. And before I explain this to you, I want to play another game. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to try your very best not to think about a shark. So when I count down, you're going to try your very best not to think about a shark. We're going to start that in 3, 2, 1. I asked you not to think about a shark. And for many of us, the moment that I counted down to 1, you may have immediately thought about a shark. But for those of us who were able to avoid that thought, chances are really good that when this picture came on the screen, it triggered you to think about a shark. And why is that? There's no sharks in this photo, but there are things that make us think of sharks. There are things that resemble sharks. It's naturally an underwater scene, which is the habitat of a shark. There's coral reefs and tropical fish in bright, vibrant colors, reminiscent of the tropical waters that sharks might live in. All of these are reminiscent of a shark, but don't include an actual physical shark. And this is how our brains work with avoiding things. When we subconsciously tell our brains to avoid something, it could be a shark, it could be thoughts of a scary movie late at night in your room. Our brain flags the thing we're trying to avoid and is subconsciously scanning our environment for anything that resembles the thing that we're trying to avoid. In other words, the brain is doing exactly what you asked it to do. But in the process, anything that remotely resembles gets flagged and comes into our mind easier. This is why when you try to stop eating junk food, it feels like there's more junk food in your environment. Because you're actively avoiding it, you notice it more. Because we were actively avoiding thoughts of a shark, a picture of a shark's habitat triggered the thought of a shark. Because I was avoiding scary thoughts, anything that resembled something scary triggered a scary thought. We can't stop having negative thoughts by just telling ourselves not to have negative thoughts. That's not how our brain works. We stop negative thoughts by overriding them with something else. Those of us who maybe avoid thinking about a shark in that last game, especially until the picture came on, chances are the way you did that was to actively think about something that wasn't a shark. And by actively thinking about something else, you kept your brain occupied long enough to avoid thinking about a shark. This is ultimately how we get rid of negative thoughts. When we identify our limiting beliefs, when we go through our Socratic questions to evaluate those limiting beliefs, and we're feeling the emotional discomfort, we don't just tell ourselves to stop. We have to actively focus on something else. And that's going to take us into our fourth and final step of the lens framework. We can begin shifting our perspective because if we want to get rid of the bad, we got to focus on more of the good. And there's really 2 key practical strategies I want to leave you with today that can begin changing your mindset lens prescription, improving your vision score, and help you override the negative thoughts you might be experiencing. Getting curious and the power of yet. What are we talking about when we're talking about getting curious? Every experience that we have, again, the stories that we're writing, we can also pull from those stories a lesson. What is the lesson that you can pull from that bad experience to get better the next time? So you tried a new diet plan. You lost 5 to 10 pounds in the first couple of weeks. Then it became increasingly more difficult to stick to that diet, and you fell off and you gained the weight back. You feel defeated. You feel trapped. You feel stuck. You feel like weight loss is impossible for you. So let's get curious. From that experience on that specific diet plan, what is a lesson that you learned? Did you learn that that particular style of dieting didn't match your lifestyle? Did you try to go too extreme in the changes that you made, that it became overwhelming and impossible to stick with? When we get curious, when we ask ourselves what's the lesson that we can pull from that experience, we are turning our setbacks into something meaningful, something positive. We are acquiring knowledge from that setback. And that makes it more likely we can succeed in the future. I don't know how many of us are familiar with improv comedy. Improv comedy is different than traditional stand-up comedy in that there is no pre-scripted routines. There's no pre-written jokes. The comedians on stage, usually in groups, are performing skits and doing bits entirely from everything they've made up in the moment on the fly. The most important rule in improv comedy is a rule called yes and. Yes and means that no matter what, when you're up there performing this style of comedy, it is your job as the comedian to never stop the plot of the story. Because if you stop the story with a close-ended statement, with a conclusion to whatever's happening, you give no one else on stage any avenue to keep the bit going. You shut down the show in that moment. But something interesting happens when we experiencing a negative setback, when we're having a negative thought. We often stop the story at the moment of discomfort. When we think about the past experiences that we had losing weight, chances are good you stop the story at the moment you realize that you had failed, when you were feeling unhappy and unconfident in your ability to see those results. But the reality is the story doesn't end there. The story keeps going. And this is where the power of yet comes in, which is probably our strongest practical tool you can walk away with today. So what I want you to do, take that limiting belief statement that you wrote down earlier. And I want you right now, you might have to change some of the words, but I want you to say it out loud as a statement to yourself. But I want you to add the word yet at the end. I am not at my weight loss goal yet. I don't feel good in my body yet. And I want you to acknowledge if you feel different when you say the statement with yet at the end, does it feel different? You may not be where you want to be yet. You may not have lost the weight you want to lose yet, but you can keep going. You can keep trying. You can pull those lessons from our Getting Curious tool to keep the plot moving. This is the lens framework that you can apply to your life to begin rewiring negative thoughts, to begin reprogramming self-limiting beliefs, and to have a clear path to achieving your goals. First, by looking at your limiting beliefs, what are the imaginary rules that you're abiding by that don't have to exist? So I encourage you to go back, scan that QR code, figure out your mindset archetype so that you know where to start looking. Once you know the limiting beliefs that exist, you have to begin evaluating those beliefs using our Socratic questions that raise the validity of those beliefs. Then we need to neutralize negative thoughts and the emotional discomfort that come from them. And we can't do that just by not having negative thoughts. Remember, we have to override them with more positive thoughts. And we do that with the two tools that we can begin using to shift our perspective. The first is to get curious about the lessons you can pull from every setback that you have. And by applying the power of the word yet at the end of our limiting beliefs to keep the story moving forward. I want to thank you guys so much for not only joining me in this presentation, but also joining me at the Breaking the Mold Virtual Wellness Summit. We've helped hundreds of men and women all over the world to master their thinking, to build their self-awareness, to lose the weight they want to lose and keep it off in a way that's sustainable and realistic for a normal person's life. And if you want to learn more about how we might be able to help you achieve similar results, scan this QR code. It's different than the other QR code. This QR code is going to allow you to book your pressure-free consultation directly with me so I can learn more about your situation. Where are the roadblocks holding you back so you can get the support you need to begin seeing the results that you want? Again, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you find more clarity in the pursuits of all the goals that you have.